Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Faith Phillips, and I am the Director of Financial Aid at Central Ohio Technical College and Ohio State Newark. And I am your presenter today for Financial Aid 101 in preparation for the 2021 academic year. I don't know about all of you, but I'm really having a hard time transitioning from 1920 to 2021. It's just a lot of twos in the upcoming years. So again, I welcome you. I'm glad that you were all able to join us for this afternoon. We're going to be doing a presentation for about 50 minutes, I anticipate, and then I will open it up for questions. If you have questions as we go along, please feel free to put those in the chat, and I will go through and read the questions when we're completed. I have everyone in listen-only mode at this time. If you are having any technical difficulties, if you are not seeing the proper slide, right now you should be seeing my first slide with the Financial Aid 101 information as well as my contact information. So if you're not seeing that, please shoot me a message in the chat and let me know. You can also raise your hand. I am trying to pay attention to the point where a hand gets raised and see if I can answer any questions that way. Otherwise, we will go ahead and get started into the presentation. So the information I am providing to you today is generic financial aid information. It is not specific to the colleges in which I work. The goal is to give you a brief overview of the financial aid process to get new counselors trained in the basics of the financial aid process. This session is being recorded and will be uploaded to the OASFAA website within the next few days. Handouts are available in the handouts section on the webinar. I did upload those a few minutes ago, so if you would like to open up the handouts, you'll have access to those now. Otherwise, they will be uploaded to the OASFAA website upon completion of this session. I would anticipate within, again, the next few days, those handouts should be put up there for you. There we go. So, as I mentioned, I am the Financial Aid Director here at Central Ohio Technical College and Ohio State Newark. I have been in financial aid for close to 30 years and here on this campus for 22 years, so I do know a little bit about the financial aid process. I'm also a member of OASFAA, the Ohio Association of Student Financial Aid Administrators, and that is who is bringing this presentation to you today. The OASFAA is a nonprofit organization that is comprised of volunteers across the state of Ohio in the financial aid community. This information is provided to you today free of service. You have our permission to make copies of the handouts and redistribute them. Of course, you cannot charge your families for this information. And should you want to reach out to us, OASFAA's Outreach Committee is who is involved in the training when it comes to high school counselors. We are a member of the OASFAA organization. I'm one of the chairpersons and a member of the committee. And we are here to provide you with a variety of services. We provide information and training to the groups really outside the financial aid office, such as OACAC, TRIO, high school counselors. So if you have any questions after this presentation, you can send us a message at outreach@oasfa.org. That goes to myself and my 3 other committee co-chairs, and we will be happy to answer any questions that you may have. This information today is put together using information from OASFAA, as well as NASFA, which is the National Association of Student Financial Aid Administrators, and FSA, or Federal Student Aid, and you'll hear me use those terms somewhat interchangeably throughout the presentation. Again, today's webinar is an introduction to financial aid, and if you're a new high school counselor, welcome, and I will do my best to try not to overwhelm you with a lot of information. Financial aid is not an easy topic to grasp completely, and we recognize that you're often the first contact for your students when they are getting this process started. So we want to make sure that you aren't the financial aid experts, but that you have enough information to help your students get started in the FAFSA process. For a more in-depth presentation and discussion about financial aid, we encourage you to join us at the OASFAA Counselor Workshops, which are being held in October And again, in December, those are the exact same sessions. They're just being presented a couple different times, offered in 12 locations throughout the state of Ohio. Registration is now open. You can go to OASFA.org under resources, and then under counselors, scroll down a little ways and you'll see the counselor workshops. All the locations are listed and you can register there. If you have been involved with OASFA for a shorter period of time than the last few months, if you go out to our website, you will notice that we have upgraded to a new website. Please bear with us as it is still a little bit under construction. So if you're used to finding items and you're not finding those, please email us at the OASFA outreach email and let us know what you're looking for while we try to get that website back up and fully running with the information that you are used to having out there. All right, so let's get into what is FAFSA and what is financial aid. The key thing about FAFSA is the first word, and it is free. The FAFSA application is free. Students should not have to pay to submit the FAFSA. Please caution your parents to make sure that they're on the .gov website, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. But making sure that they're on the right website. Sometimes students can just Google the word FAFSA or financial aid form, and you may not know that you're on a paid website until you're all the way to the end of that. So stressing to your parents and students to make sure that they're on the free application for federal student aid. Financial aid, basically funds that are provided to the student and their families to help them pay for their educational expenses. The FAFSA form is an acronym, and as you get to become more familiar with financial aid, you'll quickly come to realize that we live and breathe by acronyms. And so the FAFSA is the free application for federal student aid. It takes information about the student and the parent, and it calculates out what we call an expected family contribution, or an EFC. The FAFSA is a measure of the family's taxable and untaxable income for 2018, as well as the current assets of the student and the parent. That EFC is also based on the student's family size, the number that are in college that are in that family size, as well as other demographic information such as the marital status. The entire FAFSA application is submitted directly to the colleges and universities, but the key thing that we're looking for is that EFC, and we use that figure then to determine how much aid the student is eligible for. In theory, the EFC, that expected family contribution, is what the federal government feels that the student and their parents, if they're required to report parental information, should be able to contribute to the student's education. That doesn't mean what they have to pay out to the school. That's not what their check amount is for that academic year. It is an index or a figure then that the schools use to determine how much aid the student can be eligible for. The EFC stays the same regardless of where the student goes to school. So their ability to pay for college doesn't change whether the student is going to a 2-year public, a 4-year public, or a 4-year private. What does change is the cost of attendance for those 3 types of institutions. And we'll talk a little bit more about cost of attendance in this presentation. As you are working with your seniors in high school right now, they will be filing the FAFSA that is released October the 1st, which I cannot believe is simply a few days from now. They will be filing the 2020-2021 FAFSA form. I told you I'm having a hard time switching gears from 1920 to 2021. So if the students were to go out to the FAFSA website right now, they would see one FAFSA form out there. The 2019-20 FAFSA is out there, and that is for our currently enrolled college students that are still applying for and can apply for financial aid all the way through this academic year. On October 1st at 12:01, if you are to go out to the FAFSA.gov website, you will see 2 financial aid years listed. It will be the 1920 FAFSA and the 2021 FAFSA. So you will want to stress for your seniors in high school that they will be filing the 2021 FAFSA form again starting October the 1st. We also want to remind parents and students that you reapply for financial aid every year. So unlike the admissions process where the families are hoping that they're going through this process one time, the student selects their institution, they're accepted, and they accept their admission offer. They do have to resubmit this FAFSA every year, and it comes out every October 1st. So reminding your students that they do repeat this process. The earlier a student files the FAFSA, the earlier they may receive their financial aid package, and potentially the more financial aid they may be eligible for. And we'll talk a little bit about priority deadlines in a minute. But most colleges do set priority deadlines for filing the FAFSA form. And the admissions process is, in most cases, interconnected with the financial aid process. And what I mean by that is many colleges and universities will not look at a student's FAFSA form until it has an admissions application to match up with it. So I work for Ohio State University, and I'll use them as an example. Ohio State, a student can file their FAFSA October 1st, and they can list Ohio State University on that FAFSA, and it will get processed and it will get sent to Ohio State. But we will not pull in that FAFSA for review until we have an admissions application to match up for it. So if students and parents are wanting to wait to do the admissions application to see how much aid they may qualify for, that school may not send them anything if they have not done the admissions application. So that's what I mean by the admissions application process being interconnected with the financial aid process. So let's talk a little bit about deadlines. So most colleges and universities will set what we call a financial aid or a FAFSA priority deadline. We do this again for two reasons. One, to get families started in the financial aid process. We all know that most of us are motivated by knowing that there's a deadline to get something done. So if parents and students know that if a FAFSA is done by a certain deadline, that's the sooner than a family can get a financial aid award notification from the college. Also, colleges and universities have some limited funds of money, and some of those are federal funds, most of those are institutional funds. And they tend to give those funds to the students that demonstrate financial need and have that FAFSA on file with us by the priority deadline. So the FAFSA is technically available for an entire academic year. So as I mentioned, that 1920 FAFSA is still out there, and students that are still enrolling in college for the spring semester of next year can still submit that FAFSA. But if they haven't done it by the school's priority deadline, they may not qualify for some of those smaller pots of money. So we want to make sure that students have that FAFSA done by the school's priority deadline. So for your students for the state of Ohio, you can go on to the OASFAA website under counselors or under resources under counselors, and you can find the OASFAA FAFSA, that's a lot to say, priority deadline survey. So we reached out to the colleges and universities in the state of Ohio and asked them to tell us what your federal school code is, which basically just tells the FAFSA what school to go to, what their FAFSA priority deadline is, if they have a supplemental form that they require. So the FAFSA form is the only form that a student has to complete in order to apply for all federal and state financial aid. But some institutions want to dig a little bit deeper into the family's financial strength, and they will use a supplemental form. An example of that would be a CSS profile form. So when students are trying to find out when is the FAFSA priority deadline for the schools where I want to have my FAFSA sent to, they should also be finding out if there's a supplemental form that they need to submit as well. And then finding out when will the schools start sending out their award notifications. And that information is available to you counselors on the OASFAA website. And so if you want to help, that is just for the schools in the state of Ohio. But most of us put these priority deadlines on our financial aid web pages. And you may find a school that has a deadline as early as November 1 or November 15th. I believe November 15th is the earliest for a couple schools in the state of Ohio. Most of us have January, February, March deadlines, and some schools just do not have a financial aid deadline at all. So finding out what the school's priority deadline dates are and making sure that students know to have their FAFSA submitted by the school that has the earliest priority deadline date. Again, there may be other deadlines that the student needs to be aware of. So if there's a supplemental form, is there a deadline for that? When it comes to admissions applications, those have different deadlines. Early decision applications have different deadlines. If the student is requested to submit additional information for financial aid, that may have a deadline built into it as well. So just making sure that students and parents are very cognizant of what priority deadline dates there are. And I use the word priority, especially when it comes to the FAFSA, because the FAFSA deadline really isn't until June of the following year. So transitioning then into a little bit more about the FAFSA process and the principles of what we call need analysis. So basically the FAFSA form, like I said, is collecting information about the student and parent income and asset information. And they're taking that and doing what we call a need analysis, again, coming up with that EFC, that expected family contribution. It is the philosophy of the federal government that parents have the primary responsibility for paying for their dependent child's education to the extent that they are able to. And it is also, the student also has a responsibility to contribute to their educational costs, which is why when the student is presented with a federal student loan, that loan is in their name and their name only. The federal government also feels that families should be evaluated in what we call their present financial condition. And so for the 2021 FAFSA year, families will be reporting their 2018 federal tax information and untaxable information. So if you've known financial aid for a little while, just a couple years ago, we transitioned from using what we now call prior year income, so going 2 years back. It used to just be the tax year that families were just in the process of submitting their tax return for. So we, the federal process changed, and we now go back and we look at the 2018. One of the benefits of that is that it's actually a tax year that's completed, so they're reporting on completed tax information. This may, though, require colleges and universities to take a different look at students and parents' income, because we understand that things can change and change quickly. And so using 2018 tax information may not be indicative of the current family's financial situation. So we'll talk about special circumstances a little bit later on in this presentation. But again, we are looking at the family's ability to pay for educational costs, and we're evaluating them in an equitable and consistent manner. And that is the process of the FAFSA, as well as the process of the institutions when they're putting financial aid award packages together for students. So let's talk a little bit more about the EFC and what it is made up of. Again, it has a student piece to it and a parent piece to it if the student is a dependent student for financial aid purposes. And the bulk of the students that you are working with that are seniors in high school will be considered dependent students, and parents' information will be required to go on the form. There are some exceptions to those cases, but in most cases, an 18 or 19-year-old graduating from high school will be required to report their parental information on that FAFSA form. So again, the EFC is the amount that the family can reasonably be expected to pay. And again, that EFC is an index or a figure. It is not what the family owes to the institution or what they'll have to plan to pull out of pocket for that academic year. It is based on a federal formula that is not the measure of their willingness to pay, but ability to pay. And that is not to say there will be some families that will have what we call a zero family EFC, expected family contribution. That is not to say to that family that you would not be expected to have to pay something. Again, it is an index or a figure. That EFC, as I mentioned before, stays the same regardless of what college or summer the student goes to, and it is calculated based on a federal formula. We will have families approach us and say, you know, I know based on my income, there's no way that I'm going to qualify for any federal grant money or any of that free money. So why would I want to take the time to fill out the FAFSA form? And you may be hearing this from some of your families as well. And we in the college's financial aid offices really want to encourage every single student to have a FAFSA on file every single year, regardless of parents' income. At the very minimum, every single student will be offered a federal student loan. It is a student loan, it is a loan in their name. Schools don't want students to take out loans that they do not need, but we will present them with a student loan offer at the very minimum. Even if the parents made $1 million, they still have to file the FAFSA, and they wouldn't get paid on there that their 2018 tax information, they had earned $1 million. They will still be presented with that federal student loan. As long as the student doesn't accept the loan, it doesn't become a loan, that offer stays out there all year for them. So we want students to just not miss out on that opportunity. But The institutions also have some of their own funds that may not have as strict of a need component to it as the federal grants do. And if a student doesn't have a FAFSA on file, they will miss out on some institutional financial aid that they would otherwise receive if they had submitted that FAFSA form. And what I tell parents is the FAFSA takes about 30 to 45 minutes the first time you submit it. And next year it becomes much easier because you go in and you identify the student. It pre-populates all of the demographic information that typically doesn't change and doesn't need updated. They update it with the next year's tax information and asset information submitted. So now we're down to 15 to 30 minutes of their time to submit that FAFSA. Again, the school will offer them a student loan the next year, and if they don't accept the loan, they don't accept the loan, but at least they're trying not to miss out on any other financial aid opportunities. The other reason is that circumstances can change quickly. And so what if they started off the year doing fine, but then a parent loses their job unexpectedly and they want to do an appeal? Well, now they have to take the time to file the FAFSA and then talk about doing a financial aid appeal to see if they would be eligible for additional financial aid. So at least they have that FAFSA already on file. So please encourage your students and parents, regardless of the time that they feel that it may be wasting, to just not miss out on that. I do know there was a college in the state of Ohio that if the student, all they had to do was file the FAFSA and they automatically got a book credit for, I think, $500 a semester, regardless of parents' income. And I happen to know someone personally who just didn't want to file the FAFSA because they just weren't going to pay out of pocket, and they missed out on $1,000 a year, $4,000 total, because they didn't submit that FAFSA form. So off my soapbox on that, just making sure that you're encouraging families, regardless of what they think their income is, to still go ahead and get that FAFSA submitted. Okay, so I talked a minute ago about cost of attendance versus the expected family contribution. So we, in the colleges and universities, will create a financial aid cost of attendance. We will subtract that expected family contribution and use that figure then to determine how much need-based aid the student would be eligible for. So when we put together this cost of attendance, it's the all-in cost, the direct and indirect costs for the student to go to school. So I warn families, you've been working with our admissions representatives who have been telling you how much our tuition and fees are, because those are direct. They can give them an idea of what those will be. And they can talk about what the cost of room and board is. But when they see what the financial aid cost of attendance is, they get a little overwhelmed because that figure tends to be a little bit more than they had been led to believe. And that's because we look at the total cost of attending the university for a year. So we also build in these indirect costs, books and supplies, because you typically don't pay the school directly for your books and supplies. We also build in a component for transportation. If the student is a commuter student, we know that they need to build in funds to help pay for their transportation expenses. If the student is not a commuter student, we know they want to go home and visit their family on the holidays and breaks. And so they need to be able to budget in transportation to go back home. And then miscellaneous and personal expenses. I don't know about you, but I really want my students to have bathed and have clean clothes. And they also need to have a little bit of entertainment and a little relaxation time. So we also build into that financial cost of attendance, those miscellaneous and personal expenses. Their expenses, the student is used to relying on their parents potentially providing to them while they have been in high school, and now they're away at college and they may be responsible for those expenses. There are multiple ways that a student can submit the FAFSA. The bulk of our families will submit the FAFSA online on the FAFSA.gov website, and that is the desktop version. There is a student app and a mobile app, and there is still a paper application available. I believe that we're at 98% of families file that FAFSA electronically on the FAFSA.gov website. These are just some screenshots of what the mobile app looks like. And then we'll talk mostly about the FAFSA on the website. Now it has seen many improvements over the years. Very pleased to see how well this system works. The FAFSA on the web has built-in edits to prevent the families from making mistakes. So for example, if they plug in that the student's date of birth is July 15th of 2019, it knows that's not a logical date, and it will pop up an error box and ask them to correct that figure. It has skip logic built into it, that allows students and parents to skip unnecessary questions. So if the student says that they are female, it will not present that student with information about the selective service registration requirement. If the parent says that they are divorced or separated, it knows to only look for one parent's information. So it helps them save time in skipping answering questions they don't need to answer. They also have the option on the FAFSA on the web as well as the mobile app to use a product called IRS Data Retrieval Tool. So, and the student and the parent, if they both file taxes for 2018, can use this data retrieval tool to give permission to FAFSA to go over to the IRS, and it takes only the information off of their 2018 tax return and puts it back into the FAFSA for the student and the parent. So it saves them some data entry time, and it saves them the opportunity of making a mistake and entering that information. Also, FAFSA on the web has more timely submission, clearly more timely than submitting a paper FAFSA application, which these days can take up to 6 to 8 weeks to process. If the student submits a FAFSA online with the proper electronic signatures, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes, that FAFSA is processed within 48 to 72 hours. The results are sent to all of the colleges and universities that they list on that FAFSA. And then the student is also given notification that their FAFSA has been processed. And as I mentioned earlier, the FAFSA gets easier each year because you log in and you only have to update the tax and asset information that has changed, or the updated information, and then correct any information such as demographics that have changed. The first step in the FAFSA process is what we call the FSA ID, or the Federal Student Aid ID number. It's basically an electronic signature for the parent and the student. It's a user ID and password that they create, and it takes them through the entire financial aid process the entire time that the student is in college. The student and parent go to fsaid.ed.gov. They apply for login, and they create their personal information and their mailing, demographic information, and submit that FSA ID. Only one parent whose information goes on that FAFSA form needs to have an FSA ID. So even if both parents are married, both information goes on the form, but only one of them has to have an FSA ID. Every student that applies for financial aid has to have their own FAFSA form and their own FSA ID form. So the student goes in and identifies themselves, creates their user ID and password, submits it, and then the parent goes in and creates their user ID and password, all of their demographic information, submits it, being one parent and the student. If a parent has multiple children in college at the same time, again, each student must have their own FAFSA form, and only one parent has to have an FSA ID, and the student has to have their own FSA ID. So I have 2 children that will eventually be in college at the same time. I will use my FSA ID to sign both of their FAFSA forms, but they each have to have their own FSA ID. We have this sort of joke, but not a real joke in the financial aid community, that it sometimes is harder for us to help families get that FSA ID application completed than it is the actual FAFSA form. It does take a lot of time to, or not a lot of time, it has a lot of security questions that the family has to answer in order to create that. The student and the parent cannot use the same email address when they are creating the FSA ID. And if they choose to use a mobile phone to also verify the FSA ID, they must use 2 different mobile phone numbers. Please encourage your students to not use their high school email account when they are creating their FSA ID, because they will use this ID again throughout their entire college career, and their high school email accounts tend to be deactivated upon completion of high school. So making sure that they don't use their high school email accounts. And they do have the opportunity to verify, kind of like we all do with our bank accounts, and they send you a code. Have them, if they can, do that for both the email and the mobile phone number, so that they have some backups. If they have any issues with the FSA ID, they can use that email and the mobile app, the mobile phone number as well. So here's what the front page of the FAFSA.gov website looks like, and I stress the .gov piece. This is the free app, not any of the paid apps. So making sure that when your students and parents are getting onto the FAFSA website, they're at the .gov website. When they're going in for the very first time, they will click Start Here and identify the student. And after they've created a FAFSA record for the student, then they will log in each time after that. The student, if they're keying in their information, can log in as the student, and then the parent can log in and identify the student on their section. Again, this is the FAFSA on the web login page. We do have some errors, some questions on the FAFSA that can cause some problems. So we like to point out some of the frequent FAFSA errors. Again, filing the wrong FAFSA year. So when the student goes in after October 1st, the 2019-20 FAFSA will be out there, and the 2021 FAFSA. So making sure that the student is filing the correct FAFSA year, making sure that they are using their correct legal name as it appears on their Social Security card. When the FAFSA is processed, it goes up against the Social Security Administration database and make sure that the student is who they say they are. So they want to make sure that if the student's name is Charles and they call them Chip, that they're not using Chip on the FAFSA form, they're using Charles. Again, can't stress finding out those financial aid deadlines and getting the FAFSA submitted by those financial aid deadline dates. As silly as it is, we say this all the time, make sure you're checking those digits before you hit submit. You don't want to add an extra 0 to your income because that does inflate that ESC. You want to make sure that you're entering that in and not transposing the numbers, especially when it comes to creating, entering in the Social Security number and checking the Social Security number and the date of birth, making sure that they're correct. Submitting the correct parent's information, and we won't go into all of the details of who's the parent, but not everyone is considered the parent for the purposes of the FAFSA form, and it can only be the biological and adoptive parent of the student. And if the parent is divorced but remarried, that step parent is the other parent for the purposes of the FAFSA form. Making sure families know what untaxed income to report. The FAFSA does a really good job with the directions, and so if a family isn't quite sure if they have the untaxed income that they need to report, if they put their cursor right inside the question over to the, I believe, right-hand side, they will get the help box that pops up, and it will tell them exactly where to look on their tax returns and exactly where to look on their W-2s to find their untaxed income. We also want to make sure that families are reporting their household size and the number in college correctly. A lot of families get confused because their son or daughter is just a senior in high school, and so they don't consider them in college when they're filing the FAFSA, but they need to remember they're filing the FAFSA for the upcoming academic year. And so at the very minimum, you need to have one in college, and that's the student that the FAFSA is being submitted for. But also making sure that they're reporting the household size. We're really looking in the household size for the people in the house that the parents support, not just someone that's living there out of convenience or a logical place. So I use the example, if my mother lived with me, but she had her own income and support, even though she lived under my roof, I would not report her in my child's household size because she is not someone that we are financially responsible for. And then making sure that they are including the correct asset and investment information. And again, on the FAFSA form, it does a really good job in the directions of telling families what to include and what not to include when it comes to assets information. The student can list up to 10 colleges and universities on their first submission of their FAFSA form. So if students are really in the middle of making some decisions between a number of institutions, they want to make sure that that FAFSA is submitted by the schools that have the financial aid priority dates the earliest. So if they have more than 10 schools, pick the 10 that have the earliest financial aid priority dates and get that FAFSA submitted. With using the FSA ID as the student and the parent signature, that FAFSA is processed within 48 to 72 hours, and the results are sent to the schools and then notify the student that their FAFSA has been processed. The student can then go in and add 10 more colleges and universities. It does not tell the colleges and universities what order we are listed. So if the student is listing Otterbein, Columbus State, and Ohio State on their FAFSA form, when we get that FAFSA, we cannot see what order the schools have been listed. So tell families not to get worried about the order in which they list their institutions on that FAFSA website. Also, if they go in and add a school and they bump a school off, that other school is not told, hey, that student just bumped you off of their FAFSA, so they may not be interested in attending there. We are not allowed at institutions to see who is added and subtracted from FAFSA, so don't assure your families that they don't need to worry about that. You'll see on this slide that families get a lot of information when they've listed the schools that they want the FAFSA to go to. And this is really good information for families when they're still trying to make some decisions between the cost of institutions, where they're located, what programs they offer, that type of information. This is right inside the FAFSA form when they list the colleges they want the FAFSA to go to. So another really important thing to stress to families is the FAFSA, as they're entering in their information, is saving it for them on a secure federal website. That FAFSA does not go anywhere until the students and parents have told it to. So I don't get access to it until the students actually submitted that FAFSA. So making sure that the students submit their FAFSA, clicking that Submit My FAFSA Now button. We have several students will show up at orientations and not understand why they haven't received a financial aid award letter from them, and we'll ask them to log themselves into their FAFSA, and we'll see it nicely saved out there but not submitted. So making sure that you stress to families, once you've keyed everything in and you've checked it over, make sure you actually submit the FAFSAs to the colleges and universities. So if a student has submitted the FAFSA and they've decided they need to add more schools, again, they have to wait till it's been processed. It takes a couple of days and then they can get back in, and adding a school is considered a correction, even though they're not really correcting anything, they're just adding additional schools. But families can also go back in and correct any mistakes that they may have made on the FAFSA. The school, however, may ask them to document why they made a change there. So if you go in and change your income and your assets, we are more than likely going to come back out to the family and say, you reported this on the first submission of your FAFSA and then you submitted a correction. Can you please explain? Families cannot update information on the FAFSA except for demographic information. You cannot go in and update your assets because you had $5,000 when you submitted it, and then a few days later your air conditioner broke down and you had to spend that $5,000 to fix your air conditioner. That's not an updatable figure. It is captured as of the date the FAFSA is being submitted. So most schools will come back out to the student and parents, ask them why they made those corrections. They may also, before they make corrections on the FAFSA website, other than adding schools, they may reach out to the colleges and universities financial aid office and say, I made a mistake, or this needs to be changed or corrected. A lot of times the schools will just want the families to provide documentation to them of the correction, and the schools will make the correction on behalf of the student. If the student needs any help, there is online help under FSA, Federal Student Aid. And again, completing the FAFSA electronically is what we consider the best option. As I mentioned earlier, we do understand that we are asking families to report their 2018 federal taxable and untaxable income. But we're now heading toward the end of 2019. So almost a year later, we recognize that things may have changed in the family's financial situation. And here are just some examples that we're used to hearing from parents and students that have changed. And typically, it's loss of employment are the big ones that we see. So if a household or a student and parent are experiencing a significant change from the financial circumstances in 2018 to today, they need to complete the FAFSA exactly as it directs them using their 2018 tax information and reporting that to the colleges and universities. Then they will want to reach out to each of the colleges and universities that they're having the FAFSA sent to and explain their financial change. And then the financial aid office will explain to them, if they have an appeal process, how that appeal process works. And so, again, the most common one is apparent loss of job or income, retirement, separation, divorce, parent death. Another big one is child support, ends when a student turns 18 or graduates from high school. So when they are filing the FAFSA, they will be listing the 2018 child support that they received, but they could then reach out to the school's financial aid office and explain that that stopped in June of 2019 when they graduated from high school. The family documents it to the financial aid office, and then if the office feels that that warrants a change in the income would change that EFC, then the school's financial aid office will recalculate that FAFSA, and the goal is to get that expected family contribution to be reduced and potentially offer the student additional financial aid. So again, the conditions cannot be documented on the FAFSA form itself. They will have to report a written explanation and documentation to the college's financial aid office. they may call 3 different financial aid offices and get 3 different explanations on how they handle that change in special circumstances. We are not even required to do that. That is an authority that has been given to financial aid offices from the Department of Education. So the decisions that are made by the college's financial aid office are final and cannot be appealed to the Department of Education. When FAFSAs are submitted to the colleges, we are required to verify some of the FAFSAs that come through our offices. So the federal processor will select randomly FAFSA forms that they want the financial aid office just to make sure that the families have submitted the information properly. It's not an accusation of providing false information or that they didn't know what they were doing. It is simply just randomly pulling FAFSAs out and making us verify it. And we will then reach out to the student and let them know that they've been selected for this process called verification. We will let them know exactly what we need from them. We will review the documentation, and if they did make a mistake, we'll correct the FAFSA, and if everything looks correct, then we will move forward with the processing of their financial aid. One of the common verification items are verifying the 2018 tax information for this coming year. So if a student has been flagged for verification and did not use the IRS data retrieval tool when they submitted the FAFSA, they have the option to go out and do the data retrieval tool now that they've been selected for verification. And that will prevent them from having to bring the college and university a copy of their federal tax information. And we have most recently been able to start taking tax returns again. We were only allowed to collect tax return transcripts, which was an extra effort for families to get that information directly from the IRS. But these are items then that we will request from the student, and we often will build in a deadline date for the submission of that, again, to just keep the student moving through the process so that we can get those financial aid award notifications out to the student as soon as possible. So the student has submitted the FAFSA to all of the colleges and universities that they want it to go to, and most of us will start bringing in those FAFSAs later toward the end of this year. So starting in December is when a lot of schools will start bringing in those FAFSAs. So even though FAFSA goes live October 1st, and some schools do have some November priority dates, the bulk of us will still be setting up our systems and we'll start bringing in those FAFSAs in December or the early part of the year. So tell your families not to be too concerned if they're not hearing from the school within a month or so of submitting that FAFSA. But by the first of the year, they should start hearing from the colleges and universities, especially if they've been selected for verification. We want to get those notices out first so that we get the verification documents in and can continue the financial aid process. Once we determine the financial aid award offer, usually at this point, we're communicating with the student by a school-assigned email account. And we'll send the student an email that says, here is your financial aid award notification, or your award has been put together. You can log into a school portal and review your financial aid award. And then other schools still send out a really nice financial aid award letter. We are not required to mail award letters. So each school may do it a little bit differently, either a packet of information, an email, or an email that says you need to log in and look at your financial aid package on the school portal. At the very minimum, the schools need to tell the student how much financial aid they will be awarded from each financial aid program, how and when it will be dispersed, and the terms and conditions of the student's award. It is very important that students read about the terms and conditions. They have a lot of responsibility when they are accepting federal, state, and institutional dollars, and they will be held accountable for knowing that information. Several sources of financial aid, the biggest one being the federal government. And again, you must file the FAFSA in order to be considered for all federal and state financial aid. Then there are the states. So in the state of Ohio, we have the Ohio Department of Higher Ed that provides grants and scholarships to students. And the FAFSA is the application that they use to apply for the state of Ohio grants and scholarships. Colleges and universities also have their own institutional funds. Typically, the admission application for an incoming freshman becomes their initial application for merit-based scholarships. But make sure that students understand there could be other scholarship opportunities within the institution that may have a separate application, or the FAFSA may also be that application. Parents should also look at their employers to find out if their employers have a dependent fee remission, some type of dependent benefit, or even a scholarship program that their son or daughter could apply for. And then never turn away any opportunity from any private sources. And I'm hoping that you as counselors have access to that information from your local foundations and local organizations that you are sharing with your students, but also letting them know that there could be other private opportunities out there for applying for financial aid. The types of financial aid, we break them down usually in two different kinds, a gift aid and a self-help aid. So the gift aid being the aid that they do not have to pay back. We usually title those scholarships and grants. And the self-help aid, the student loans and potentially student employment, where the student would work an on or off-campus student job and get a paycheck that they would then use those funds to pay for their educational expenses. Gift aid is typically what we call need-based financial aid. The grants, again, that the student doesn't have to pay back. There are need-based loans, but they're not considered gift aid. The student does have to pay those back. So that actually shouldn't really be under gift aid, but I put it under need-based aid because the subsidized loan is considered a need-based loan. And then work-study jobs, which are federal funds that are used to pay the student that works an on-campus job. Then you have the self-help aid, not need-based, and most of these do require a FAFSA form to be on file. So there are loans, there's an unsubsidized student loan as well as private loans, VA benefits, and even if a student doesn't qualify for federal work study, they could still qualify for a job on campus that is not using the federal funds. It would be institutional dollars. And then, of course, your merit-based scholarships, which are based on the student's performance. And as I said a few minutes ago, typically your admission application as an incoming freshman serves as your application for the school's merit-based scholarships at that point. So I mentioned earlier that the EFC stays the same. The family's ability to pay doesn't change whether they go to a higher cost or a lower cost institution. What does change is the cost of attendance at that college. So you can see on this slide, the higher cost institution at $58,000, a mid-cost institution at $40,000, and a lower cost at $22,000. That family's EFC is $8,000. That stays the same. But you can see their need that the school has to meet in the need-based aid is larger when they attend a higher cost institution. Each college and university is required, if they participate in federal aid programs, to put out what's called a net price calculator. And this is a great tool for students and parents to use to not only understand a little bit about the financial aid process, but what the actual net cost of going to college will be. And so that should be on every single financial aid web page or school's web page, and it should be called something to the effect of the net price calculator. Mentioned a few minutes ago about outside or private resources for scholarships. Please encourage your students to look for any scholarship opportunity they can get. You know, students aren't real keen on filling out applications, and some of them may see, oh, this is only going to net me $200, and they don't want to take the opportunity. My first question to them would be, would you throw $200 away if you were just given it? And the answer is going to be no. So they should take the few minutes that it takes to fill out a scholarship application to get as much free aid as they can. When students and parents see the cost of books alone, they are wishing for a couple $100 extra just to pay for books. But please have them be aware of scholarship scams. They should not be paying for scholarship information. So if they're anywhere that they're entering in private information like social security numbers, date of births, and any credit card or payment information, they want to get off those sites. They do not want to apply for those scholarships. Pursuing any local scholarship opportunities they can, checking with colleges and universities, constantly checking their web pages for any updated scholarship information. And then there's a reference to the U.S. Department of Ed scholarship search engines. So just caution your families, do not pay for the financial aid form process and do not pay for scholarship information. So the state of Ohio, as I mentioned, under the Ohio Department of Higher Ed, also has financial aid programs for the academic year. And for 2021, they will have the College Opportunity Grant, Ohio War Orphans, National Guard, Safety Officers College Memorial Fund, the NELP Student Loan Program, as well as the Choose Ohio First Scholarship Program. So we'll talk a little bit about the OCOG. So OCOG is the Ohio College Opportunity Grant. Again, there is another acronym that we like to use. Student has to file the FAFSA, they have to be an Ohio resident, and they have to be attending an eligible Ohio or Pennsylvania institution. And they can get this OCOG at public and private colleges. Their family contribution, that EFC, has to be less than or equal to $21.90, and their maximum household income is $96,000. So they do have to be needy students in order to qualify for OCOG. They can receive up to a maximum of 10 semesters or 15 quarters of enrollment. So it's a generous program in that if a student goes 4 years, 2 semesters a year, that's 8, or 2 semesters a year, yes, that's 8 semesters. And we know that students don't always get through in 4 years. So they're generous enough to give them a couple extra semesters to complete that first bachelor's degree. Once you have a bachelor's degree, you no longer qualify for a Pell or the OCOG. And here's just an example of the chart. This is just for the public institutions, but community colleges and regional campuses such as Ohio State, Newark, do not qualify. Students that attend those campuses do not qualify for the Ohio College Opportunity Grant, simply because our tuition is lower, and the Pell Grant at its maximum typically covers close to, if not all, of the tuition and fees at those type of institutions. So students attending those schools would not qualify for OCOG. However, there are a few exceptions. One of those would be if they have an eligibility form as a foster youth student. Students who go full-time summer, autumn, and spring, for example, at a 2-year school or regional campus could potentially max out on their Pell Grant and potentially get some Ohio College Opportunity Grant money. Federal Work Study is that. It is a federal program. They have to have a FAFSA on file to be considered for federal work study. They need to say yes to being interested to an employment on the FAFSA form. And they probably need to have that FAFSA submitted by the school's priority date in order to be considered for the federal work study program. It is excluded on the EFC calculation the next year if they earn federal work study wages. Employment may be on or off campus, but the bulk of these programs are on campus. And it allows students a little more flexibility than if they worked in an off-campus job such as McDonald's or Wendy's, because it allows them to go to class for a couple hours, go to work for a little while, go to another class, and then potentially be done for the day, for example. Also, your supervisors tend to be a little bit more flexible with student employees. We understand their students first, and we work around their class schedule and test schedules and such. Then you have the federal Pell Grant and the Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant. Again, the FAFSA is the vehicle or the application for these grants. The student has to have a specific ESC in order to qualify for these 2 grants. The SEOG is an institutional federal grant, and so again, maybe based on meeting the school's priority deadline date. Then there are student loans, and as I mentioned earlier, every single student, regardless of parents' income, will be offered a federal student loan. And schools gain nothing by encouraging students to borrow. We absolutely do not want them to borrow if they don't need to, and they do not have to accept the loans that are put before them. They actually have to take action on those loans in order for them to become a student loan. Benefit of the student loan is there isn't a credit check, nor do they have to have a job or documentable income in order to qualify. It's what we used to call years ago a guaranteed student loan. Parent is never responsible for paying back that loan. If the student chooses not to make payments on it, all they will do is contact the parent to try to locate that student. Parents can also borrow a loan in their name called the Federal Direct Plus Loan on behalf of their dependent student. And there is a credit check to the parent loan that is looking to see the parent's credit standing. We encourage all students to only borrow what they really need, recognizing that they have to pay it back. We do consider it a very good investment in their future, but they should also be really realistic about the potential of repaying how much they borrow. If you're going into a low-paying career, you want to make sure that you're borrowing what you're going to be capable of paying back. So students, in order to qualify for the federal student loan, again, must file the FAFSA form. They will review it and see it on their financial aid award letters. And if they choose to accept it, the school will direct them to studentloans.gov to sign a promissory note. They're promised to repay the student loan. And all first-time borrowers are required to complete what we call entrance counseling, where they read about their rights and responsibilities as a borrower and take a little quiz at the end. I share this information with you because the students are still going to be enrolled in high school when these award notifications are coming out to them, and they're being directed to information about student loans. And so we want counselors to be aware. They may be coming into you with their award letter saying, what is this loan? What's this interest counseling? What the heck is an MPN? What do I have to do with that? And so we don't, again, expect you to be financial aid experts. We just want you to have enough knowledge to answer some basic questions, and then know to always refer them to a financial aid counselor at the colleges where they are planning to enroll. We want to help them through this process. We want to make sure that they get it submitted completely and correctly, and we want to make sure they're not accepting something that they actually don't need. We want to be very careful when we put financial aid, or excuse me, we put student loans on a financial aid award letter, because we don't want students to feel like they are required to accept those student loans, which is why it's important that students read the information that is presented to them, and we recognize that they don't always do that. So if you need more help or the students need more help, you can always refer them to the Federal Student Aid Information Center, the 1-800-4FED-8 number. But please have them more often than not go to their school's financial aid office first, because they will get the direct information as it impacts the college and university where they're planning to attend. So I often refer students to a college financial aid office before I would refer them to the 1-800-4FED-8. FSA ID help, however, rarely can we help them in the financial aid office with a messed up or a locked up FSA ID number. So they will want to call FSA ID under 1-800-4FED-8 if they are having trouble using your FSA ID number. The OASFA Outreach Committee also wants to help you facilitate a financial aid night for your students and parents, and we are still taking requests for these. So if you have not scheduled a financial aid presenter to come into your school and speak to your parents and students about the financial aid process, please feel free to go onto the OASFA website under resources, under counselors, scroll down where it says high school financial aid night presenter. You submit the information about when you would like to host your financial aid night, and we will match you up with a presenter that will come out to your high school and present to your students. So please take advantage of that. We want to make sure that you don't feel like you're responsible for sharing this information with your students in this detail. That's what financial aid professionals will do. And when you have someone like myself come out, again, I am representing financial aid in general. I am not representing Central Ohio Technical College and Ohio State New York. I do not come out and do a sales pitch for any of my colleges, 2 colleges that I work for. I'm there to get the information to the students and parents about getting the FAFSA submitted. So I will take any questions. I've been looking in the chat and I'm not seeing any questions pop up, but if anyone has a question that they would like to submit in the chat feature, please feel free to do so. If you have any questions that you would like to direct to me, they are on the front page of the handout, which again, hopefully you've been able to download under the handout section. It says 1 of 5, but there should only be 1 under there. But you are also welcome to email outreach@oasfa.org, and any of the 4 of us, we all get those emails and we will respond to those. Please make sure that you have gone to the OASFA website and added your name and email address to our college access and school counselor contact database. This is how we will notify you about any of the trainings that we are doing. You can also use our website page for counselors, where you can again request your financial aid night presenter. You will get information about the October and the December counselor workshops. Again, the registration for that is live, and keeping your email information updated with us. So we are right at about 3 o'clock. I know that was a lot of information in a short period of time. I appreciate your attendance on this beautiful September day. I hope you have a great fall and that everything is going well in your high schools. And please don't hesitate to use my contact information. Shoot me an email or give me a phone call should you have any questions about how to help your students through this financial aid process. I want to make sure that students and parents, regardless of where they're going to college, get the information that they need when they need it, and they get the correct information. And I will be the first to admit if I don't know the answer, I will research it, or I will find someone else that I can refer a student or parent to. So thank you again for attending Financial Aid 101. We will be having a Financial Aid 201 in the first of the year, and as soon as we have that information put together, we will put that out there on the OASFA webpage. Have a great afternoon. Thank you again for attending.